I will never know if I had, if it was concussion related or if I actually had ADD. It's a part of my drive to get into this eventually down the line and how all this has worked to figure out what it could be, what happened, and like, I'm fine now for the most part. My wife might disagree, but I was a scholarship athlete. I played baseball in university, and baseball got me into school. I had that ADD designation, and it was, okay, everything's going to be a little bit easier now because you have that, so don't worry about your grades, just throw the ball fast, which is what I did. My master's in education at Niagara University. I moved to Vancouver in 2010. That's when I started teaching at ARROWSMITH School and working with kids with learning disability through the same type of program we're using now. It's quite a bit different, but similar roots. Started engaging in research on brain injury in 2015 with UBC, which is kind of odd considering my background because there's not really a relationship there, and became executive director earlier last year. Married with a son, a 3-year-old boy, and that takes up all of my life. I don't know if you noticed, I have no education in the world of brain science. So how did I end up learning about all of this, and why am I talking to you? Something I learned going through my master's for education was that some of the best teachers that you'll ever have are the ones that it didn't come easy to, and they had to learn from the ground up, and they had to figure it out. If things come natural, and you can, you see it with math people, like, how do you know this answer? How do you get to this same direction without really going through the steps? It's hard to teach that because it's such an inherent skill. So the best teachers that I saw were typically those C students and B students who, they had to figure out the methods and everything behind that. And getting into this type of work for me and coming into research, I had to learn it from that lens. So at this point in my life where I am with my work, it's valuable to be able to teach it from that ground up, roots up level rather than how do you understand this? Neuroscience is simple. It's not. It's very complicated. It's just how you kind of talk about it, because it is pretty simple if you can actually explain it at the level that people are learning it. When you have a stroke, you don't really know what to expect, and then you start learning everything, and then you become a stroke expert. Right? That's how it kind of works.
Slide.
So a little bit about the ARROWSMITH program and why we started looking into brain science from education. So Barbara Arrowsmith Young, she wrote the book, The Woman Who Changed Her Brain. It's on the New York Times bestseller list. The book that I've given to the people here, this book is profiling her journey through how she created all of that, what that all looked like coming through the start. She was raised with a very severe learning disability in a world that did not recognize learning disability as something that could change. It was a lifelong diagnosis. She was told that she had a mental block. And for her understanding level at that time as a kid, that meant there was a wooden block stuck in her head that was preventing her from being able to learn and grow and develop like normal kids. And this led her into some darker times. And you can sympathize with that. Like when things aren't going well, it links to some of the more negative aspects in the brain, and that can strengthen as well. So not only was it tough to learn and grow and develop and change, but socially isolating. So what she started to do, because she was brilliant, was start to research different types of people to see how she could understand this thing, because she got older and realized there's not actually a wooden block stuck in my head. What's happening with my head? So she started researching Dr. Luria. He was a Russian neuroscientist, and he was starting to observe people who had survived different types of head wounds during the war. And there was one guy in particular that he was studying, and she would spend her nights in the libraries reading through all of this stuff, and that was her life goal, to figure out what was going on. And noticed that in her life there was some bigger issues such as organizing, telling time, understanding cause and effect, understanding sarcasm, little things we take for granted sometimes that are more difficult when you have something wrong with your head at that point. And he was looking at someone he was fine, normal, everything was good, survived a shrapnel wound right through the corpus callosum, right through the middle of his head, and he could no longer do all the things that she couldn't do from birth. So it was that point she said, maybe there's something wrong with my head in that spot. She was also doing research on Dr. Mark Rosenzweig, and he was one of the first people to ever research neuroplasticity and come out with that. And what he did was look at enriched environments for mice and rats, and he would put some in the best environment. They had all the friends they wanted, all the food they wanted, all the toys that they wanted, and another set was in isolation, in a cage, no friends, limited food, just enough to survive, and the brain structuring was entirely different with the rats in the enriched environment versus non-enriched environment. So that was like, well, maybe if I put myself into the right environment and my brain can actually grow, I can heal this part of my brain that's not functioning properly. So I guess what physical environment are you putting your brain in? Is it a negative environment? Is it a positive environment? Often you're told to rest after injuries or illnesses. That's kind of changing now. They're getting people out of that. If you're putting yourself in enriched environments that are stimulating your brain in any way, it doesn't matter what you're doing, as long as you're using your brain, that's going to be something that's going to really help to drive change within the lobes that you're using. If you're not using it, it's going to do some selective pruning and kind of get rid of some of those things. So as long as you're using it, you're focusing, you think that it's helping, you're noticing changes, repeat, because it is going to forge good connections within the brain. But neuroplasticity, is it all good? What does it mean? It's essentially networks wiring together in the brain, and the brain establishing that as a default network. Once that default network is there, then you're able to prune off some of the other ones, and then that's the superhighway. It's kind of like bushwhacking versus like taking a jet over top of the trees. Right? It's a lot faster to recognize. You're like, I'm not going to go through the woods again. I don't need to even remember where that trail was. And the brain gets rid of that connection. But we hear the word a lot. It really is a buzzword right now. But how can it be negative if you're living in those regions that are not a safe space? And what we see often is that foggy brain for some people after an injury, where you get to a certain part of the day and I can't do much more, and then you're in a limbic system where your fight or flight system is more activated, or right on the edge, where like if anything happens right now, right? And that's because that network is not strengthened. So neuroplasticity is a terrible thing if you're living in those areas, because it's strengthening those things. And the more rest you have, the more time away from the good areas of the brain that you have, and the more time you are spending in that network, and it's strengthening, and can make you more anxious and more depressed. So how did Barbara Young use science to change the world? What do you see, well, the people that are in the room, I guess, what do you see when you look at a clock? Yeah?
Can you repeat the answer?
The question? Or?
The answer that Marcy gave.
Oh, the time? Or numbers, yeah. I see.
I see the time.
Yeah, it jumps out at you. We're conditioned to know that a analog clock means time. But really it's a circle with lines and numbers, right? The slightest little change of one of the hands makes a massive change in what that actually means in the real world, right? So if we're looking at like what a clock actually means, it's a relationship between different symbols that our brain interprets to make sense of one thing, right? So that's what your brain's doing. What it's reading it, it's using multiple parts to decide and decode what's happening. We know it, we can read them pretty quickly because we've been seeing them forever. And if you look at like what was happening when you were learning to drive or when you were first learning to read a clock. It was very odd. There was a lot of things that you needed to keep track of. When you're 16 and you're just starting to drive, there's too many things on the road to really comprehend, plus your parents are screaming at you from one side, you're jamming on the brakes, to 2 years later, 3 years later, it's automatic. You're not even thinking about the things you need to do, right? Because that network has been established. So when you're reading the clock, it's firing up a lot of different things, mainly your corpus callosum. And other things in life that could be similar really is driving, taking in a lot of information at once and making sense of it. But Barbara knew that she could not read a clock. Like, she wouldn't be able to say this is 10:09 and 32 seconds, right? For her, that would take a long time just to be able to process that information. So she started making flashcards and saying, okay, if I know neuroplasticity can work, I can try to get faster and faster. And she did it for hours and hours a day. Once she figured out two hands and she could say, oh, this is 10 after 2, this is 3:25, very quickly, and the processing speed was coming up, she'd add another hand, so add a third hand on, then a fourth hand, then a fifth and a sixth hand, then an eighth hand, and then up to 10 hands. And because of that, what was actually happening in her life was she was able to do all of these things that she couldn't do. She was now problem solving. She was able to make jokes with friends. She was able to have friends. She was doing all of these things, and that led her to create 19 other different areas that she could target within the brain just in the function. And this is kind of where I came in. My background's at ARROWSMITH School, and I had a very healthy skepticism about what we were doing. I was a teacher coming to a new city. There weren't many jobs around. I had that background with my ADD and my concussions that really led me to having a drive to see what they were doing at this school. And it's a pull-out school. You would go there for 2 to 4 years as a kid and then go back into your normal school. They did math and English just to keep those up, but otherwise you were just targeting weaker brain regions that never really developed. So it was kind of like 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year before that region would be firing up as it should. Then the brain was balanced and you could go back into the normal school. For me, the proof was in the pudding. I needed to see it work. And one of my we did not get along on day 1, probably day 50, still didn't get along. But after 2 years, he went back into his normal school, was voted valedictorian that year, so before going into high school. So I'd seen him come from a corner yelling at me, not engaging in anything, to fully functioning kid. And that was this program works. What else could this do? And even in the training, I asked Barbara ARROWSMITH, could this work with different types of brain injury? And her response was, maybe you could do that one day, not knowing that would actually happen. Typical school systems fail because, and what I saw was as soon as my diagnosis came in, it was no longer the teacher's fault that I wasn't doing well. Before, they would fight for you, and they would help, and they would try to get you back up as long as you were willing to put some work in as well. But at that stage, why are you even doing this extra work? You have your scholarship offer for baseball. Just sit on that. We'll get you that C so you can get through, but don't even worry about putting the time in. And I didn't like that, and I wanted to get into education so that I could help those who were in that situation, not really getting into special education. But education and neurology, as I started getting into some of this work, they're not fields that talk. They have no real communication. There's one linked PhD program at Vanderbilt in the US. But you would think that education and the way the brain works should be the same thing, but it's not. So really we're taught the wrong way our entire life because we're not actually learning the way that we should. So we started our study with UBC, kind of explain how we got into that. We were starting to do research with the kids with learning disability, and some of those scans, I was with Dr. Laura Boyd out of UBC, some of those scans were coming back the initial scans were coming back, and we were seeing some movement in brain regions that physical science hadn't seen, physical therapy hadn't seen within brain injury. And we had a mutual interest at the time with my background with my concussion, our founder, is in the picture with me there. That's Mark Watson. We had a big interest in seeing if this program could work with other types of like, whether it's stroke, whether it's encephalitis, whether it's brain fungus, whether it's anything that could have happened external from the brain, car accidents, sports injuries, and we had that mutual interest. So we merged, started the study with 13 people, at least 2 years after their brain injury, ranging from 18 to 54 years old. And they were ones that had plateaued in the recovery. And I hate that word, that you've now plateaued. I think it's more of a word they like to use in court, so they don't have to give you more money or they don't have to give you your job back and all of this stuff. We're not going to get better. And the brain has an incredible, amazing ability to improve at any level of any injury, as long as it's in that proper environment. So we went from 3. Because of the success at 3 months, we went to 6 and 9. It was only supposed to be a 3-month program. They did 4 different cognitive brain regions for 45 minutes per activity, 4 days a week. So what we were hearing at that time was, as we were recruiting in hospitals and support groups, was, I've got nothing else. I'm going to be a terrible candidate for you guys, but I've been approved, so I'm going to come. But I probably can't come every day. I can't take, like halfway through the day, I need to take a nap. So thank you for letting me in, but I'm not going to be a good candidate. At that 9-month, it was a 96% attendance rate. We were seeing amazing things with that, and I'll get into kind of what we were seeing, because it really relates to any type of brain injury, not just traumatic. And we just focus on executive function. The most important thing you need to do within the day, within your brain. So what is executive functioning? What does the term executive functioning mean? Does anyone have a good definition of that or understanding?
It's like your cognitive capacity, like your ability to reason and think, and like short-term memory, working memory, and all that lives in that executive functioning.
Synthesize information and process information.
Yeah.
So can you repeat the comment?
Synthesizing and processing information, basically your working memory, how you're getting all your information through your power of your brain. Where it lives and the regions involved is typically your prefrontal cortex and the connection between your hippocampus and your frontal lobes, which is where you're working memory. And when those are firing up appropriately, it can do a lot for you, and that's why they're so important. And when our executive functioning isn't working properly because of an accident, illness, or stroke, it's going to feel like it's overworking. And what some of the science that they were starting to see, and they actually presented some of this within our study, was that the brain was working about 5 to 10 times more than someone who didn't experience any type of brain injury versus the controls. So it's not underworking. It looks like it's underworking, but it's way overstimulated. And it needs to take a break, and it needs to take a nap. So the results of the study. Oops. I think there's a couple you can kind of press to the next one.
Okay, I can do this.
And different pictures come up.
Oh, okay.
One more. There we go. So on the top, some of the scans we did 5 different sequences of MRI. So this one was the water myelin scans, and they didn't think they would find anything with this. They'd never really scanned TBI patients before. Myelin is typically found, or a reduction in myelin is found in MS. I was meeting with the researcher yesterday who created that scan as well. And what we were noticing was, so the healthy control is the people who haven't had any concussions recently, and the bottom is the TBIs within ours. So the myelin sheath, if you're not aware, is a fatty tissue that kind of goes around the nerves in our body and brain. It's kind of like the plastic around a wire that helps it transmit the information better. When there's less myelin, it's harder for the information to really travel because it's not an insulated space, right? So something that we were looking at, and I kind of got more information yesterday about this, which was enlightening for me, but we didn't know if people that had sustained the head injury had less myelin because they were predisposed to having a worse concussion, and that's why they had the symptoms, or if the hit itself stopped the production. And we're thinking more along that line, that the hits actually, and this is just yesterday I found this out, that it's looking like it's that route, that the brain is actually producing less myelin at that point. So it's putting itself in a state, and that is the foggy brain. That's the confusion that we're seeing. There's two ways to increase your myelin. There's a video game that you can do, more like virtual reality type stuff, and education. If you have a good education, I believe you can't really see too well with the coloring, but the 51-year-old female on the top right is a doctor, so you can see way more of those bright blue colors because she spends a lot of her day reading and has very high education. So if she was to take a hit to the head, she would probably not sustain as big unless it really hit a network that was doing a lot. And this could be, these TBI people were at least 2 years away from their brain injury on the bottom. And what I heard yesterday as well was it's gotten a lot better at that point. So it'd be interesting to see what the myelin kind of looked like. Yep.
I'm just curious, because as far as I know, the stroke is an ABI.
Yep.
Is it the same sort of thing?
We are starting to see the same types of behaviors. So it all relates back.
And so the question was, we're looking at a screen for a TBI, and the stroke is an ABI. So is it the same results when it's an ABI?
So if we're looking, and how we compare a lot of that now, because we didn't know when we started the program, our study was only in traumatic brain injury, but then we were letting people with acquired brain injury, and we were seeing recovery at the exact same level. So we're assuming right now that we're seeing the same type of recovery. We're going to be looking at investigating more if that is the case. That's kind of what we're getting at now.
It would be interesting in that study to look at somebody who's had both, which would be somebody like myself. I had a dozen major concussions and a fractured skull before I had my stroke.
Yeah.
And so I've always wondered if there's a bit of a causal impact.
Yeah, so it was interesting. We treated one first responder, as a firefighter. He'd been out of work for close to 2 years. That was creating an environment for him in his brain that was very toxic, and called us kind of like, this is my last life, and this is my last service. I can't go on. And he was an NHL player in the past. He was a firefighter at the time, so he had a lot of concussions there, but then he also had a stroke in Moya. So there was a lot of different things going on in his head. He was back to work in 2.5 months without the symptoms. So if you're putting the brain in a healthy state, because regions function as they should, it depends, because you'll have one person, if you have two people standing side by side, they both take a hit to the same side of the head. It really depends on that person how they're going to react. So if you look at it as, if you have 3 people now, and one person has a stroke, and 2 people are getting hit, and it really depends on how the structuring in the brain and where the strengths are in the brain, how it's going to impact the person. So a lot of the time, we will see people that look the exact same, have the exact same disabilities, and one person had a brain injury from a car accident, and the other person had a stroke. And it's impacted that part of their brain, and they've had the same region or the same strength attacked, that it's leading the brain to compensate and heal in different ways.
That's right.
So another big one, this kind of showed us the most information. And this is a big explanation for what you're feeling with the foggy brain, what you're feeling when the fatigue sets in at noon and you need to withdraw, is the EEG measurements within the brain. I was kind of talking about this a bit before. The picture on the left with all the connections within, like you would see that typically in an EEG measurement. And when I was reading the posters on my breaks in UBC and reading all the different things in science that was showing what was actually happening within the brain of different types of injuries, but they were also looking at infants. When we started to get research back at our 3-month point, it was showing that the brains on the baseline for TBI was the exact same structuring within EEG readings, so the electrical impulses within the frontal lobes, as you would see within an infant that was just learning movement. So if one of those superhighways and those functional connections has now been hurt, the brain wants to heal it all means necessary. So it's going to try millions of tries. right? But it doesn't know how. So that's going to create that fatigue, the tiredness, the exhaustion, where you need to, it's the same thing you see with a toddler. Living with a 3-year-old at home right now, I see that all too well. There's a certain time in the day when if he's not eating or sleeping, we're going to feel the pain from that. And it was the same thing we were seeing with some of the people in the study coming in. It was a certain time of the day, and they were getting to that fight or flight system, and it was only a matter of time, and then it got easier and easier and easier. And a big comparison I make with this is like looking at the map of Vancouver downtown. There's a number of bridges coming in. So let's say the big earthquake finally comes, Burrard Bridge goes down. A couple of weeks later, everyone's kind of getting back into it. You've got to get back to work. But now your boss is upset because you're late. The traffic was terrible. You're not going to try that route the next day because that didn't work. But everyone's going through that same thing. Until the bridge is built again, until that structure's back, you're never going to have the same ease of getting downtown. It's always going to take longer and take more time. So what the brain kind of needs to do is have a new network system kind of put on top so that it can work and function as it should. And that was something we weren't even going to have in the study. It was put in last minute because it was on the same floor, sorry. But and the students could do it, so it was free. So it was something, we can get the students involved, and it was the biggest thing that we saw because they didn't know that the brain was overworking at the time. They thought that it was underperforming, but it was actually putting in a lot more work. We also did neuropsych and ARROWSMITH assessments. So the ARROWSMITH assessment's the one we do with the kids with learning disability, and the neuropsych was completed by the UBC Department of Psychology using the NIH toolbox. And something I was learning at that time was the big difference between crystallized and fluid intelligence. Are you guys familiar with some of that? Have you heard much of that? So crystallized intelligence is the ability to use skills, knowledge, and experience. So an example I kind of put is the door's right there. To get out of the room, I need to go through that door. That memory system is kind of like how we see the world. That's true, right? Like we know, we can recognize those things. Fluid intelligence is more of the ability to reason and problem solve. So an example, like it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I've been busy all day. Can I function the same way to solve new problems as I did when I woke up this morning? So improved functionality within your fluid intelligence would show improvements in that world, of being able to take in more information, do new things. Next one. So what we were starting to see within this was if you're looking at the orange, that would be the healthy control without concussion or brain injury. And the TBI group between the red and the yellow would be from 0 months to 3 months. And we're seeing massive improvements in fluid structure. So the intelligence scores were going up to be able to problem solve. Crystallized was a little bit. We didn't expect it to be that much unless you were quite severe, because you know the world is kind of the world and you're able to remember most things. So that was a big deal for that, because what we were seeing at the exact same time was, I know that I said I wouldn't come and that this would be tough and I wouldn't benefit from this, and thank you for coming in, but I'm actually coming every day now and I'm feeling a lot better. How are you going to get rid of this gap in my resume? How am I going to get back to work? What do I say? How do I disclose my disability to my employers? How do I do that in interviews? Very negative sounding language in a very positive lens, because those are good things to start working through, because you're actually able to start going back. And we were seeing that within the entire group. And that was kind of odd for us because we didn't expect to see that. Like I was saying before, the kids that we were used to working with them with learning disability coming from 2 to 4 years. This was at 3 months. We didn't know how it was working so fast. But science means nothing unless people were feeling better. We could see all the results we wanted, but unless people were saying, I'm doing better, I'm feeling better. So we had a support group that was going at the same time. One of the participants runs the GF Strong support group, so she was involved in this study. So at 6 months, every week they would have their own support group in the room, and she ran it, and I got kicked out, which was good, because we want them to be able to to talk to each other. But they started reporting clearer thinking, increased memory for details, increased executive functioning and attention, more outgoing in social situation, and increased understanding in real time. The individual was in care, moved into his parents' house, and then was living independently within 9 months. So what do we do at the Watson Center for Brain Health? So we took the cognitive program that we were working on there, and I'll get into a little more the different regions that we work with and how that all looks. But we wanted to add in mindfulness meditation, we wanted to add in counseling, and we wanted to add in exercise. We didn't do those during the study because there's so much research on those things already that show the benefit, and we didn't want that to cloud the research that we were doing. Since that point, we did do another research study using the same data points, just with people that were in our program, looking at all four. We saw a massive reduction in anxiety and depression, increased cognitive connectivity in the frontal lobes, really seeing the horse blinders kind of open up and run for the full day without needing to take breaks, being able to do everything they needed to do. So one of the big things was mindfulness meditation that we put in. This was another thing where I needed to see proof on how this worked. It sounds great, but for me at the time it was like, this is more of like a break, and to be able to just like calm down and calm the brain down, and that sounds great, and that's why we want to do it. We can go to the next one. Nope. Yeah. So I really had my big turning point with mindfulness, even being in seminars where I learned how to teach it, and I was going through mindfulness sessions for our groups, and we have free events on Fridays if anyone wants to come in, and twice a month we have free mindfulness sessions for brain injury. And our staff decided on a weekend we would do a retreat, and all of us were going to go, and it was going to be nice because it's nice when work pays for something and you get to go to it with each other. And I had the rest I would have gotten in a month off that I did in one weekend, just being able to meditate through that. And then I saw the real value of like how much of a de-stressor it can be, how it can let you get in touch with your emotions in the moment to be able to control some of that, to be able to predict things that were happening and understand how your body was feeling, get in touch with that side. It is invaluable. If you're not already meditating, you should be. There's some resources, I think I'll show them later, free ways to get on there, and some cheap paid ones too. But it's really worth it to get the practice going. It doesn't have to be religious. We don't have any aspect of religion in ours. It's more about just getting in touch with your body and understanding it. Holistic wellness, I knew at that point when I heard, I'm feeling a lot better, what are you going to do for me now? How am I going to get back to work? How am I going to explain the gaps in my resume? That's when I knew we needed counseling in the program to work through some of that. We started with CBT therapy, which is really good for understanding like cognitive behavioral therapy, understanding how to pick up some of those triggers and understand certain things. And did I put that in the wrong place? Yeah.
Sorry, my head.
Did you put that one backwards? So if you're not talking about the things that are happening, it's going to start to weigh on you. So really find someone to talk with. Find either a counselor. Like friends aren't always the best ones to vent to. Someone, a third party that's separate from it, I really encourage. We've switched into trauma-based therapy in our program because we found it was more important to deal with some of those deeper issues that would actually help you engage in life. And we kind of did that through a fluke. Our counselor was going on vacation, and we brought in a substitute that's like, oh, I don't really do CBT therapy, but I do more trauma-based somatic experiencing. And we're like, oh, we're worried that people weren't going to be able to go back and do the program.
What is
Cognitive behavioral therapy. Yeah, so it works on some of the behaviors within the brain and fixing some of those to make the change, rather than dealing with the deeper situations. And that change was pretty massive. We were seeing people really deal with some of those deeper things, and then being able to re-engage in life, understanding how to approach family, understanding how to approach friends they'd lost touch with. I think you can jump to.
Here's your meditation slide.
Yeah. So physical exercise, this was the biggest game changer that we saw. It doesn't need to, so in our program we start with up to 5 minutes, if that's all you can do. Our big goal is getting to 20 to 30 minutes at 70 to 80% of max heart rate. What that's going to do is it's going to build a bunch of natural proteins. The one we're really trying to get is BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is like a fertilizer for the brain. And once that's kicking into gear, and it starts to produce before you're too tired. Sometimes with exercise you get too exhausted from it. If you're at that 100% or 90% for that amount of time, it makes a big difference on your body being able to function cognitively after. I know even sometimes if I run at lunchtime, I will push it a bit harder than I need to versus running in the morning because I feel guilty running at lunch and you got to get back and get going again, so it's harder to focus again. So it's really about staying in that heart rate thing, and that's different for everybody. For some people, that's 5 minutes on a stationary bike. We have a couple stroke survivors who had gone from stationary bikes month 1 to the normal bikes where you're actually sitting up, sorry, not recumbent bikes where you're pushing out, to stationary bikes where you're sitting up, to walking on the treadmill, to running on the treadmill. We're not working on physical fitness. It's only going to help your state that you're actually able to do some of that. And that's something I want to look into with research as well, because we don't know how that's happening. But if you know anything about like the PONS device, it distracts, it's the device you put on your tongue, it distracts parts of the brain that are getting in the way of normal body movements, and then your brain kind of strengthens and understands these networks, and it's kind of an underlying way to do it. We're kind of seeing, not the same type of results, I don't want to compare, we're not doing that, but when the brain is in a healthier state, when it's used to exercising, when it's functioning the way that it should, your body movements can come back in a way that you're not even working on your body to do. So it's pretty cool to do that. So if you're not exercising for a portion of your day, I would very, very, very much encourage that. So some of that kind of like what I talked about, it stimulates the growth of neurons and connections. BDNF is released in intensity cardio. We only do cardio. You can get BDNF through weightlifting. The reason why we don't do it in our program is once you're feeling better and you're starting to, you can conquer the world. We don't want to put people in situations where they would get injured. But with a personal trainer and a program that's set up, if you have trouble with cardiovascular exercise, look into getting a program set up for weight training because it can meet that same need. Improves overall mood and reduces stress, anxiety, and depression, things we know about exercise. A lot of the time when we're not exercising, we like to ignore those things. No, I won't do that. But, it does help. Reduces high blood pressure, preventing the occurrence of another stroke. And we improve executive functioning in stroke survivor population, participating in common exercise programs and other programs. So it has help with stroke. It's been studied with stroke, how it could help. So, and then looking at our executive functioning. So the executive functioning, we're looking at the right brain, left brain, corpus callosum, and the working memory, which is kind of that front section, right to back. And just benefits not even from our program for cognitive functioning, and this is across the board. It doesn't need to be ABI, TBI, massive improvements in executive functioning, working memory, learning-dependent changes in gray and white matter, so it's actually changing that structure of the brain, and that's what we're kind of seeing within ours. And adults learning a new language experience changes in white matter. So there's different types of cognitive training that can really help. It really depends on what you need and what type of programs out there to target that. Next one. So let's check some of your brain functioning.
Yeah, we've got about 15 minutes.
Okay. Some common cognitive deficits, so like changes in personality, people notice, emotional regulation, anxiety and depression, fatigue, some aphasia, or short-term memory or long-term memory, trouble with problem solving, difficulty planning, organizing, starting or completing tasks, and difficulty concentrating. So being able to focus on one thing without attention going out there. Some people have a couple of these, which is more or less severe, and that's easier to kind of work with because you know what you're working with. And some just, it's the whole thing. Everything on there is difficult on there, and then you know that it's more of, you've been impacted within your frontal lobe, you've been impacted functioning, and it's not that you can't improve and heal and get better. It's going to take time. We need patience.
No, it's muted.
So if we're looking at the left brain versus the right brain, I don't know if you guys have done much research on this. It's kind of fun. So the left brain's more of that logical, fact-focused. I really look at it as like organization, time management to a certain point, reading comprehension. Math and science isn't really in the frontal lobes. It is a part of it because you use some of that. You're planning, you're organizing, all of that. Whereas the right brain is more emotional based, more reading situations, understanding people, understanding how your emotions in the moment can actually change how you're dealing with situations. The big thing about the right brain, and when there's a dysfunction going on in the right brain, there's a couple different types of people. There's the people that are like, I don't know what I'm seeing. I know that I'm not seeing situations right. I know that things are hard and I can't read. I know that I act inappropriately among people. The tougher ones and the tougher one to see is the person that doesn't know that they're having that right brain, that they're reading situations, that they're acting inappropriately, and then you're kind of walking on eggshells a little bit to see them through some of that. Those are the tougher pills to swallow for people when they start to see, when those changes start to come. And I regret how I acted in this situation. I know why the friend doesn't talk to me anymore. I don't like how I get when I get angry. That's the type of thing that as soon as you notice that, at least we're working with something. But left brain with the organization and everything, people are easy and quick to say that they don't get how to organize these things. Whereas the right brain, we're much more guarded about how we see the world because it's how you see the world. How do you challenge someone that you're not seeing the world properly, you're not understanding situations properly? It's really difficult to coach through some of that sometimes, but it's possible to change. Is this a myth, the right versus left? There is some talk about, like, because the brain is a whole thing and you really use all of it all the time to do everything, there's not that whole 10% of the brain works at a time thing really isn't true. Much more of your brain is work. It could just be working. There could just be parts that are firing up a lot more. It doesn't really matter in the fact that if it's true or not. What it is these are functions, and how we're describing these things, these are things that play a part in our normal everyday life. So if we can strengthen those behaviors, and even if we're associating them to where in the brain that's happening, it doesn't really matter as long as the behavior is improving and changing. And not like negative or bad behavior, but like the behavior of the region of the brain, how it's working, how it's functioning. The corpus callosum links those two. So that's the big thing with the clock, with the foggy brain, with understanding, with coming back from driving and not being able to get behind the wheel because there's so many things and the doctors are concerned that I can't do that and all that side. But it's the superhighway between those two sides. And if that superhighway is down, it can be really tough to take in the world. Read a situation. How does it play into, how do I organize it? How does it play into the personal side? So the two sides really need to be working quickly. So this is processing speed. This is cause and effect. This is sarcasm. This is keeping your energy through the full day to be able to get through. Issues there are really that foggy brain, that the day isn't going well today at this time, and I don't know how to improve from that point. So this, like if you're looking through any brain scans, it's the one that really lights up the most. Working memory, more of that link from your hippocampus to your frontal lobe. And what we're seeing now is improvements in speech because of that connection improvement. So as you're taking information in, and kind of a way we do this is with sentences of a certain length. So a 13-word sentence, you can take that whole thing in, no problem. As soon as you add the 14th word, it's not that you forget one word, the whole thing's gone. And you remember just a little piece of it. Yeah, we were talking about the girl in the red dress or something like that. You can't actually recall the whole whole story of it. And now as someone's still giving oral instructions and you're kind of stuck on that first part and then you realize they're still talking and giving information, and even keeping up with the amount of information that I'm giving with this, it can be like, oh, he's still talking with that region. I forgot, okay, what was that? And your brain can kind of get distracted with that. But it's also the same region that formulates and gets your ideas back or your memory back to push the language out. So organizing your speech patterns. So we're seeing improvements on some speech language pathologist tests where we're not working on SLP at all. So we're seeing like 5 years worth of progress on those just because the brain's in a healthier state with that. Any questions about cognitive functioning? I do a little more as far as these things are concerned. Yep.
I've had a stroke, and I'm wondering what is available.
Mm-hmm. Like cognitive program-wise?
Anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot you can do on your own.
The question
Yep,
is, if I've had a stroke, what is available to me for my cognitive function?
There is our program where we're actually targeting some of this. It depends on what neuropsych's kind of showing too. The big issue with neuropsychological assessments is that it's diagnostic and there's not much like what do you do once you get that diagnosis, right? So a problem with research within brain injury of any type is at 2 years they say that nothing's going to change and all your spontaneous recovery is done. And the big reason why that has come out is because that fits a lot better for insurance companies and they're not going to invest. That fits a lot better within the current system that we have in the medical, where it's risky. How are we going to put money into something where all the research, all the limited research is saying that you're not going to get any better, right? Which is why for us it's kind of risky coming from education into healthcare with a new platform. We didn't even mean to get into this work. It was kind of a fluke because we knew we'd helped a couple of people in the past. We had an opportunity to do research and then saw the benefit. And that was like, so people from 2 to 22 years out of their injury and within stroke 2 that we're seeing in our program, at any stage they're seeing the same recovery that they would have seen at month 9, month 10. That your brain won't stop healing. It's just in the environment that it's in and what you're offered, it seems like it's stopping because there's not much out there to offer. So I feel your pain that there's not many services out there. I'm sure these ladies have more ideas for actual programs that you could access. As far as cognitive rebuilding, there's not much out there. That's kind of how we got talking as well in the first place, was that how do you push people to programs that don't exist, right? So we need more money put in from the government to research this. We need more resources from universities put into and dedicated to finding new ways to improve. And even like little scale projects can go a long way in actually proving the efficacy of certain things. So there are some tricks that I'll kind of show later of things you can just do at home, easy things. Other questions?
Should I come to your facility?
Should you? That's a good question. What we do is we have free trials to see if it's a fit. And what we'd be doing is we'd be looking at all those regions, how they're behaving, and then have a discussion after to see if it would be a fit. So if you want to set something like that up, we can chat after.
Yeah, where are you located?
Burnaby, right off of Kensington Avenue, off the highway. There's a SkyTrain less than a kilometer away.
Just checking to see if anyone online has any questions. We'll go on to the next slide.
Growth mindset is one of the bigger things. As people get more depressed and anxious, the longer you are with your disability, it's easy to start looking at the negative side of everything. Where we try to use a lot of language that's more growth mindset based. So an example of fixed mindset is I'm not good at math, I'm never going to be good at math. I'm not good at running, I'm never going to run, right? So those like, it's a mindset that you identified with yourself as that person, whereas really you can adapt and grow and change in any situation. So being able to understand some of that can keep you engaged in things, trying new things, and that's the biggest thing that I would say, try anything, at least once. And if you like it, keep doing it, because it's going to create a pathway in your brain that's going to make that task easier and easier and easier. So what can you do actually to start now? 30 minutes of exercise if you can. Even if that, like we've had people with full knee grafts after accidents, like just doing the hand bike, right? It's anything is going to help. If I do 1 push-up today, it's more push-ups than I did yesterday, right? So you can. I've always said that too. I started doing push-ups when I was 14 and got better every day, right? So if you start something now. If you start something now, it's going to be easier. You're not expected to improve and be ready to run a marathon tomorrow. Every little bit helps. Meditate, get a practice down. So there's some free resources. Headspace is a good one. There's 10 free that you can cycle through as long as you want to cycle through them. That really teaches you how to meditate. Calm was okay. You'll get to a point where you don't really need those apps or things because it's a natural thing where you're able to just get in that meditative state once you learn what meditation is. It's just a matter of controlling your thought and coming back to just focusing on your breath. So that's one stage of meditation. And then your attention goes away and then you come back to the breath. That's 2 stages. And then you just get further and further in distance until you're just able to kind of stay in that zone as best as you can. But people spend their entire life trying to meditate perfectly and no one does it. It's just about getting that practice in. The deep breathing really helps as well. Pick up new activities. I would say something people put off is reading. I'm not sure how much tablet reading and phone reading is actually targeting the same aspect because it might be distracting us more than engaging us. And I'm not sure how science is going to show that, how technology has come in. But anything helps. I know sometimes screen time is hard. If that is, you're fortunate because you're still reading books. And that's a good thing for your brain. Learn a new instrument, develop new skills, get a new hobby. Really anything that's going to keep your brain engaged in something is good. What's possible when the brain is in its healthiest state and working as it should? So this is just some data from our program that I just got this week. For people that come in and say, I want to go back to work, this is the numbers for them. 70% of those who are coming back aren't working at all when they come in, and 79% when they finish their program are going back to work within a month, and 67% of them are going back full-time. Of the 30% that come to us that are already working at least part-time, 88% are going back to work full-time. We're not using medicine. We're not doing anything out of the ordinary, exercise, meditation, cognitive work, and counseling. And it's just allowing the brain to function as it should. When it's functioning as it should, like an example I like to use is if they say that if you lose one of your senses, say you go blind, that your other senses are going to pick up, and now your smell is better, your touch is better, and you're navigating the world. Nothing will replace your eyes. Nothing's going to give you sight back. Right? So the brain kind of works the same way. Is nothing's going to do the job as the task that you're focusing on as the region that's made, as well as the region that's made to do it. So if you can get that clicked back on and it's functioning well again, then your other aspects of your brain aren't going to need to focus on things they're not made to do, right? And then it's going to be in a healthier state where it's able to get the rest it needs. It's not overstimulated, it's not overfiring, and it's in that healthy state. And that's where we're seeing people have issues with one side of their body from stroke start to run on a treadmill, because their brain's in that healthy state. I don't like using medicine. We try to wean people off as much as we can with the help of doctors to look through, and that's something else that we've worked on. I started doing that with ADD medication and ADHD medication within the School for Kids, where we work with the doctor to make sure that we're staging down. So as the focus improved and the ability to maintain attention on the task is improving, we're coming with some of the medication. Because often the pain medication that people go on are causing more of a brain injury than actually the thing they're trying to treat. So that's just some of the new stats we have. Anyone wanting to learn more about our program, the Watson Center is only over 18, but the Eaton ARROWSMITH School for kids still, if there's anyone with stroke that's under 18, they can contact them and they'd be happy to facilitate conversations as well. So that's my email there. I can be reached at any time to set up trials. There's no cost for trials. I think Yannick can be reached as well about maybe future collaborations and all of that too, as we're looking to statistically prove how this is working with stroke as well as brain injury. We've got another study with Health Tech Connects going. We have another study with BC Cancer looking at lobotomy, cognitive recovery after lobotomy or chemobrain. So there's a lot on the go. We're excited to keep going. We're looking into first responders. We've got a study that we're just working on the collaboration with the military to look at post-traumatic stress, because we're seeing a big reduction in post-traumatic stress in those that are coming in and reporting it. So if it all comes back, the brain functions, it's one thing. So if we start to look at, I have this or I have that, it's just where that's impacting the functionality. And if you're able to trigger and focus on where that part, what the task is that that region of the brain is doing, and you get that back on by focusing neuroplastically to make a change in that region, then it's going to have a recovery. Doesn't really matter how. So the big things that we look for people in our program is the ability to focus on the task. And that can be 10 minutes one day, 15 minutes the next day, 5 minutes the next day, 25 minutes the next day. We can build up to that, but if there's like issues with sight or vestibular issues that can come up, or migraines that really set in really soon, we might say there might be other programs that we can go to first, or things that we can try first. But that's what we're looking for in the trial from our end. To say, okay, we're looking, this isn't a rebuild. We're only in a 3-month window here, and we have big goals within that time span. I don't know if that's the last one or not.
I think it is, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments for Josh here in the room? And I will also ask online.
How long has your center been out?
Our center, we've been at Fortia Sport and Health in Burnaby for 2.5 years. The research was started in 2015 though, but the program for learning disability has been around. They have worked with brain injury as well throughout the years, but that's been around since the late 70s.
Is there any waiting list for a trial?
Not really.
So the question was, is there a waiting list for the trial?
You're good at remembering that.
Yeah.
As long as we get contacted, there are days that are more blacked out, but for the most part, I can make time to squeeze people in. There is nothing out there like this in the world that's working the way we are, to our knowledge. So we just had someone who was living with us for 9 months. There's a hotel in the building. It's not an inpatient treatment center, but they were living independently there for 9 months from Ohio. So people are coming from further away. Because of the opportunity that we have to be able to help as many people as possible in a world where they're not getting much treatment, Mark Watson left the Watson Center Society for Brain Health because Barbara ARROWSMITH didn't have the power to be able to do all of learning disability and all of brain injury. So she signed over the licensing rights to our program to a company called ABI Wellness. They're bringing this out to existing medical centers around North America. So hopefully there's a lot more people doing this work. We don't want to be the only ones in Burnaby, and we are moving to a much bigger room in our building on June 1st, so we do have space to accommodate more people. But we can't be the only ones. I know that there's now a few other groups that are trained to doing now, so they should start picking up within the next few months. There's one in Surrey, one in Squamish, one in Kelowna, one in Idaho. So, yeah.
since you're basically proving to government and these other entities that they need to put more money into this, has there been pushback against research trying to stop you?
The world of education was much more difficult. Healthcare pushback, I wouldn't say, healthy skepticism, which we like. Like I met with a lawyer last week who's one of the best trial lawyers with the insurance companies, and now he's fighting against them. But he was coming in doing his due diligence, saying, if you're hurting people, if you're taking advantage of people, I'm going to find out, and I'm not going to let you do that. But if you're helping people, I'm going to tell everyone, make sure all the trial lawyers know that they can get the services in. And we want that. We know that what we're doing is changing lives. Like our return to work statistics, like typically programs brag about 40%, and we're seeing upwards of 80%. So we're really happy with what we're seeing and the changes that we're seeing. But it's just about, everything takes time. We became a nonprofit organization so that we could give people more access. We have household income-based payments. We have an OT now on staff to help get third party to pay for certain things. And we're meeting with ICBC pretty diligently right now to get people in with car accidents and have all of that covered. And we want to have this for everyone.
So just want to go back on something, because that talks about site vision issues. You don't think vision issues or?
No, vestibular issues like, yeah, so issues that come, like, want me to repeat that too? So
the question is, do you take people with vision issues?
No, I mean, they're not like blind or anything.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying.
Vision impairment.
Like, I don't see any of the peripheral.
So that's fine.
Yeah.
What we're looking for is that impairment now forcing you to leave the room and you have a massive migraine because your eyes aren't picking. Yeah, that's different.
Okay.
What we're looking for is the ability to engage in the tool.
Okay, I get it.
What about your funding sources? Are you taking donations?
Yeah, so the biggest thing was, are we going to become a charity or are we going to stay nonprofit? And the differences between all of that. Going nonprofit opened up a lot. We have a MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with the Fortius Foundation, so donations can come through them for tax receipt purposes. So we were able to fund over 30% of clients last year, just within that. We'd like to be bringing in more. We're getting closer with discussions with public health as well. It takes time, especially since we're not really the license holders at this point. So we want to get umbrella coverage for ABI wellness, so any center opening now has that coverage. That's a focus that we're kind of working with them on. Does that answer?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you would like to make a donation, I can put you in touch with Andy Price. He's the executive director of the Fortius Foundation. Or if you know any industries that are, or this would be a mandate. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk after this.
Okay.
I have a question. There are many people that are looking for apps to do exercise, to cognitive exercises. Are there any apps that you would recommend for this group of people?
So the question is, are there any apps that Josh would recommend for people who are wanting to do their own sort of home-based cognitive therapy or practice?
I think you just need to temper your expectations in anything that you're doing. It's hard to know exactly if the task you're working on the app is going to, like, we get hopeful that it's going to cure everything because you're doing this and you've now paid for it. And I wouldn't say not to do the apps that are out there. I wouldn't say I would recommend any specifically. I would say that you want to work around compensations of the region. It's like if you're doing a bench press at the gym, right? And you're trying to, okay, I'm going to focus on my chest today. You get nice and strong and big and hit a baseball ball, right? Then you have two people on each side of the bench press holding the thing up for you and pushing it up. That's what the brain does when it's not functioning properly or not well enough, right? It recruits other aspects in to do well. And what you see a lot of the time in those types of tasks is that you're using everything you can to get that check mark, because then you get the dopamine rush because you got a check mark, right? And then you feel good because you think you're doing good things for your brain, and you might be, because it might be targeting the region you need, but the chances are that it's really focusing on your needs are slimmer than the benefit you would get. So I would say go ahead and do them. If you're feeling benefit, keep doing them. But if you're noticing that you're not really getting much out of it, it's hard to find the time, that's a little bit different, then it might not be worth the money. Then it's better to get a library card and social groups and that type of thing. But I wouldn't say don't do it. I would say temper your expectations.
So online, they're saying their questions have been answered by the folks in the room. So
You're welcome.
good job, people in the room.